Rena stepped off the small bus at the edge of Ardent, a quiet town tucked between rolling hills and dense forests. The sun was dipping low, painting the streets with soft orange and pink hues. She adjusted her backpack, feeling the familiar excitement and nervousness of starting an investigation alone. In her hand, she carried a notebook filled with sketches, old maps, and notes from her research. Her target was the town's old theater, a grand building that had been abandoned for decades. From the outside, the theater looked like a relic of another time. Its tall, arched windows were dusty, and the paint on the walls was cracked and peeling. A once bright marquee above the entrance sagged, the letters faded and half missing. Yet, even in decay, it held a certain charm, a reminder of laughter, music, and applause from long ago. Some of the townspeople said the theater was haunted. Others whispered about strange shadows moving behind the windows at night. Rena, who had always loved mysteries, felt a thrill run down her spine. She had to see it for herself. The heavy doors groaned as she pushed them open. A faint scent of dust and old wood filled her nose. Inside, the theater was dark, silent except for the occasional drip of water somewhere deep within the building. The air was cool, brushing against her skin like a gentle hand. Rena turned on her flashlight, and the beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of crumbling seats and a stage shrouded in shadows. As she stepped further, the floorboards creaked under her weight. Her heart beat faster, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had explored abandoned buildings before, but there was something different about this place. It felt aware. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift, as if they were stretching and stretching toward her without reason. Rena shook her head. "It's just my imagination," she whispered to herself, though a small part of her wondered if it was more than that. Rena moved carefully through the theater, taking notes on everything she saw. The curtains were torn, and faded posters of old performances hung crookedly along the walls. Some showed actors frozen in mid-dance, others singers captured in mid-song. She ran her fingers over the posters, imagining the theater as it had once been, alive with energy. It was hard to believe that such joy and creativity had existed here, now replaced by silence and shadows. She reached the stage and looked up. The ceiling was tall, with intricate designs barely visible under layers of dust. Above her, the chandeliers hung like frozen stars, some missing crystals, some tilted to the side. Rena felt a strange pull toward the stage. She stepped onto it and shined her light across the empty seats. For a moment, everything was still. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a shadow moving along the far wall. Rena froze. The shadow darted again, faster this time. She swung her flashlight, but there was nothing there. Her heart raced. "Okay, think," she muttered. "Probably just a trick of the light." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. Determined not to be frightened, she continued exploring. Backstage, she found old props and costumes, dusty mannequins posed as if frozen mid-performance. A tall coat on a stand looked like it had been waiting for an actor who would never return. Rena examined the area carefully, taking photos and writing notes. She noticed that some shadows seemed unusually dark, almost like they had substance. When she moved past them, they shifted, almost following her. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed through the theater. It was barely audible, a faint whisper, almost like a voice calling her name. Rena stopped and listened, holding her breath. The whisper came again, gentle and deliberate. She called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Only silence answered. She felt a chill run down her spine, but curiosity outweighed fear. Rena took a deep breath and stepped toward the whisper, her flashlight leading the way. The deeper she went, the more she noticed the unusual patterns of the shadows. They did not behave like normal shadows cast by objects or light. They seemed to move on their own, stretching and curling, sometimes pausing as if thinking. Rena jotted down every detail. "This is incredible," she whispered. "These shadows, they're alive in some way." Night fell outside, and the theater became darker and more mysterious. Rena realized she could not leave just yet, there was too much to observe. She set her backpack down, opened her notebook, and began sketching the shapes and movements of the shadows. Each flicker, each curve seemed to tell a story of its own. She felt both nervous and excited, like she had stepped into a place where the past and present were meeting in ways she could barely understand. As she worked, one shadow lingered closer than the others. It seemed to hesitate, then stretched toward her hand. Rena held still, her breath steady. Slowly, she reached out, feeling a faint warmth, almost like a pulse. Her heart skipped a beat. Something in this theater was trying to communicate, and she was the first person in decades to listen. Rena smiled faintly, the thrill of discovery mixing with a little fear. She knew this night was just the beginning. Shadows in the theater had secrets, and she intended to uncover them all. Rena had spent hours sketching the flickering shadows, her notebook filled with strange shapes and patterns that seemed almost alive. The theater had grown colder as night deepened, and the creaking of old floorboards sounded louder in the stillness. She paused for a moment, leaning against the stage railing, trying to make sense of what she had seen. Then it happened. A shadow moved differently from the rest. It did not flicker or stretch as before. Instead, it seemed deliberate, sliding across the walls with purpose. Rena's heart jumped, and she froze. The shadow stopped for a moment, almost as if observing her, then slowly approached the center of the stage. She held her flashlight steady, the beam trembling slightly in her hand. "Hello," she called, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her stomach. The shadow paused. Then, to her astonishment, it seemed to respond. It stretched upward, forming shapes that vaguely resembled arms, pointing toward the old curtain. Rena's curiosity overcame her fear. She stepped closer, her flashlight following the shadow's movement. The floor creaked beneath her careful steps, echoing through the empty theater. "Are you trying to show me something?" she whispered, her voice almost blending with the soft sigh of the building around her. The shadow moved again, slowly sliding along the wall, and paused near a small trapdoor at the back of the stage. It lingered there, and Rena realized it wanted her to open it. Her pulse quickened, but she nodded to herself. She had come this far, she could not turn back now. Kneeling, she lifted the trapdoor. Dust rose into the air, making her cough. Below, a narrow stairway led down into darkness. Rena hesitated only a moment before stepping inside, flashlight in hand. The walls of the stairwell were damp, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and iron. At the bottom, the space opened into a small room filled with boxes, old costumes, and strange, dusty equipment. The shadow floated in the middle of the room, as if waiting for her. Rena walked carefully around it, examining the objects. She noticed papers scattered on a desk, sketches, notes, and diagrams. Her eyes widened as she realized these were plans for strange machines, mechanical designs she had never seen before. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked up one of the sketches. They were trying to do something with light," she murmured, studying the diagrams. Maybe capture motion, or something like it? As she spoke, the shadow moved closer, almost as if it understood her. She could feel a strange energy in the room, a connection between her and the shadow. It paused near a strange machine tucked in the corner, a device of levers, glass tubes, and glowing panels. Rena's eyes widened. She had never seen anything like it. Cautiously, she approached the machine, brushing away layers of dust. The shadow floated beside her, guiding her attention to a lever. Taking a deep breath, Rena pulled it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the machine hummed softly, and a faint light glowed within it. The shadow quivered, stretching taller and brighter in response. Rena stepped back, fascinated. She could feel that the shadow was aware, intelligent, even playful. It moved with a rhythm, twisting and bending in patterns that almost resembled dancing. She realized that this was not a simple haunting or trick of the mind. The shadows were alive in a sense, connected to the machine, almost like echoes of something that had existed before. "Are you trapped?" she whispered, unsure if she expected an answer. The shadow seemed to pause, then shifted in a way that felt like agreement. It moved toward a nearby mirror, reflecting her own face back at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a faint outline of a figure within the shadow, a performer, frozen in time, reaching out. Rena felt a chill run down her spine, but she was not afraid anymore. Instead, she was filled with wonder. Here, in this abandoned theater, history and technology had combined to create something extraordinary. Something that had been waiting for someone to understand it. The shadow suddenly darted toward a small cabinet, opening a drawer with no hands. Inside were tiny devices, small tools, and more notes, all carefully arranged. Rena bent down, picking up a delicate gear and holding it in her hand. She realized the shadows were guiding her, helping her piece together the story of the theater and the mysterious machine. Hours passed like minutes. Rena drew diagrams, examined equipment, and watched as the shadow continued to move with intelligence and grace. The flickers along the walls no longer frightened her, they fascinated her. She began to see patterns, a language of movement she was determined to understand. Finally, she leaned against the wall, exhausted but exhilarated. The shadow hovered near her, as if satisfied with her progress. For the first time, Rena felt a deep connection to this place, to the echoes of the past that had lingered so long. She knew that she had only scratched the surface of the theater's secrets, and that the real mystery was just beginning. Outside, the wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying faint echoes of music and laughter from a time long past. Inside, Rena and the shadow remained, two curious beings exploring the remnants of a forgotten world, ready to uncover the theater's deepest secrets together. The next morning, Rena woke in the small inn at the edge of town, her mind still racing with images from the theater. Shadows that moved on their own, machines that hummed with energy, and the faint impression of figures frozen in time haunted her thoughts. She sipped her coffee slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of the night before. She knew she needed answers. The town library was her first stop. It was an old building, filled with shelves that smelled of wood and paper. Dust floated in the air like tiny golden sparks in the sunlight. Rena moved carefully between the rows, searching for any records of the theater's history. Her fingers brushed over worn books and faded newspapers, stopping finally at a large, leather-bound ledger. The title read simply, "Ardent Theater Archives." She opened the ledger and began reading. The theater had been a hub of creativity decades ago. Actors, singers, and dancers had performed there, but the records also spoke of a man named Malik, an inventor who had fascinated the town with his strange experiments. He was brilliant but mysterious, often working alone in the theater late at night. People whispered that he had tried to capture something magical, the essence of movement, light, and sound itself. Rena's eyes widened. Could Malik's experiments be the reason for the shadows she had seen? She flipped through more pages, finding sketches of machines that looked very similar to the one she had discovered backstage. Notes described storing energy in a way that preserved motion, almost like memories of performers, trapped in forms that could move even after the humans were gone. Her heart raced. "It's like, he captured life itself," she whispered. She traced a diagram showing a network of lights and mirrors that could manipulate energy, the same kind of strange patterns she had seen with the shadows. Malik had written about his hope that one day, people could interact with these stored movements, almost as if the performers had never left. Rena took careful notes and copied the diagrams into her notebook. She felt a thrill of discovery and a deep sense of responsibility. If Malik's work had survived this long, she might be the one to unlock its full potential. But there was more to learn, and the library was only the beginning. That afternoon, she returned to the theater, armed with her new knowledge. The shadows were waiting, flickering softly along the walls as if recognizing her return. She stepped onto the stage, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. The shadow she had first encountered floated toward her, guiding her to the machine in the hidden room. Rena studied it carefully, remembering Malik's designs. The gears, levers, and glass tubes suddenly made more sense. The shadows were connected to the machine, they were echoes of past performers, preserved by energy and light. She could almost see the faces of dancers, singers, and actors reflected in the shifting forms. The thought made her smile. History was alive here, dancing just beyond sight. As she examined the equipment, one shadow moved differently than the others. It hovered near a console, pointing to a small drawer she had missed before. Inside were more notes, written in Malik's careful hand. They described experiments to teach the shadows to respond to humans, to mimic gestures, and even to communicate in subtle ways. Rena realized the shadows were intelligent, capable of understanding and learning. Her mind raced with possibilities. "This is incredible," she whispered. "They're not just echoes, they're a form of life." She gently reached out toward a flickering shadow, and it stretched to meet her hand, flowing like liquid but solid enough to feel faintly warm. She felt a pulse, like the heartbeat of a living memory. Rena spent hours experimenting. She mimicked gestures, clapped her hands, and moved across the room. The shadows responded, copying her movements perfectly, then performing gestures she had not shown. It was as if they were trying to communicate, eager to share the stories they had remembered for decades. She began to realize that Malik's greatest achievement had not been the machine itself, but the shadows, the performers who could never truly die, living on in motion and energy. As the sun set outside, Rena paused to reflect. The theater was no longer just a building, it was a bridge between the past and the present, a place where human creativity had been preserved and was ready to bloom again. She thought of Malik, working alone all those years ago, and felt a connection to him across time. He had believed in the magic of movement and energy, and now she understood. She sat on the edge of the stage, notebook in hand, and watched the shadows move around her. Some danced softly, others shifted in ways that resembled conversations. They were playful, curious, and alive in ways she could barely describe. Rena felt a smile spread across her face. She had discovered the past, and in doing so, she had found the key to the theater's future. For the first time, she understood that this place was more than a mystery, it was a gift. The shadows were waiting, patient and intelligent, for someone to guide them and share their stories. And Rena knew she had been chosen to do exactly that. She closed her notebook and stood, determination shining in her eyes. Tomorrow, she would explore further. There was still so much to uncover, so much to understand. And she had a feeling that the shadows had only just begun to reveal their secrets. Outside, the night wrapped the theater in quiet darkness, but inside, the echoes of the past whispered and danced. And Rena, the curious engineer, was ready to listen. The next day, Rena returned to the theater with renewed determination. The early morning sun cast long, golden beams across the town, but inside the abandoned building, shadows still clung to corners and crevices, dancing slowly along walls and ceiling. Rena carried her notebook, flashlight, and a small toolkit. She felt a growing excitement, a sense that she was on the brink of a major discovery. She stepped onto the stage, and immediately, the familiar shadow floated toward her. This one, the first she had encountered, seemed more eager than ever, stretching and twisting in shapes she could barely describe. It hovered near the machine, pointing, moving, and flicking as though guiding her attention. Rena nodded. She had learned to listen in a different way, not with her ears, but with her eyes and intuition. Carefully, she began to mimic the gestures the shadow made. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her arms, tilted her head, and moved her hands in sweeping motions. The shadow copied her perfectly, then added new movements she had not performed. It was playful, as if it were trying to teach her a language of motion. Rena laughed softly, the sound echoing through the empty theater. "You're clever," she whispered. "I want to understand you." The shadow then drifted toward the side of the stage where the curtains hung in tatters. It lingered near a small section of the wall that seemed ordinary at first glance. Rena approached, shining her flashlight carefully. The beam fell on faint outlines of a door, hidden by years of dust and neglect. She frowned. How had she missed this yesterday? The shadow stretched toward it, as if urging her to open it. Rena hesitated for only a moment before reaching for the handle. The door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a narrow corridor that led deeper into the theater's bowels. She stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were lined with old wooden panels, worn smooth by time. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of metal and oil. The shadow floated ahead, moving with a deliberate pace, guiding her forward. The corridor ended at another door, smaller and reinforced. Rena's pulse quickened. She could feel that something important lay beyond it. With careful hands, she opened the door. Inside was a room she had never seen before, a hidden storage area filled with equipment, machines, and stacks of papers. The glow from one of the machines reflected off the walls, illuminating faint diagrams that reminded her of Malik's notes. Rena stepped in, marveling at the collection. The shadows gathered around, moving with energy and curiosity. She could almost feel their excitement. She began examining the machinery, noticing that some of the devices were designed to interact with motion. Mirrors angled light in precise patterns, and levers seemed to control small bursts of energy. It was clear that Malik had been experimenting to create something extraordinary, something that required both machines and shadows to function. As she studied the equipment, the first shadow moved to a small panel on the wall. It pointed to a series of buttons and levers. Rena hesitated but then pressed one of the buttons. Instantly, soft lights began to flicker along the walls, tracing the movements of the shadows as they danced. The air filled with a gentle hum, and the shadows responded instantly, forming shapes and patterns that seemed almost like stories. Rena's eyes widened. The shadows were communicating through movement, creating visual sequences that told stories she had never seen before. Some shapes resembled people, some animals, and some abstract forms she could not name. It was as if the shadows were trying to share memories from the past, preserved in their energy. She spent hours observing and interacting. Every time she moved, the shadows mirrored her, then added new gestures, guiding her attention to corners of the room or machines she had not yet noticed. One shadow floated to a small cabinet and opened it, revealing more notes, diagrams, and small tools. Rena realized that the shadows were not just passive remnants, they were active participants, intelligent guides helping her uncover the theater's secrets. By late afternoon, Rena felt a deep connection with the shadows. She understood that they had been waiting for someone to notice them, someone who could understand the delicate balance between human creativity and the energy Malik had preserved. It was a responsibility she accepted gladly. Before leaving, she made careful sketches of the sequences she had observed, noting the patterns and shapes the shadows created. She knew this was just the beginning. The shadows had shown her a hidden world, a layer of the theater she had never imagined. And she could feel that tomorrow, they would reveal even more. As she stepped out of the hidden room and closed the door behind her, the theater seemed to sigh. The shadows flickered along the walls, as if waving goodbye for now. Rena smiled, feeling a sense of awe and wonder. The theater was alive in a way that went beyond simple architecture or history. It was alive in movement, memory, and energy. And she had found the key to unlocking its story. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the town. Rena walked back to her inn with her notebook tucked under her arm, her mind buzzing with ideas. The theater's secrets were deep, but she was ready. She had discovered the first layer of a remarkable world, a place where shadows remembered, and history lived in motion. And she knew, without a doubt, that the shadows had more to show her. Rena returned to the theater the following morning, her curiosity stronger than ever. The town outside was quiet, the streets still bathed in soft morning light. But inside the theater, the shadows waited, flickering along walls and ceilings like playful spirits. She stepped onto the stage, her flashlight cutting through the dimness, and felt a familiar thrill. Today, she hoped, she would uncover the heart of the theater's secret. The first shadow floated toward her immediately, spinning and stretching as if excited to guide her. It moved quickly to the corner of the stage, where a small trapdoor had caught her attention the day before. Rena knelt and opened it carefully, revealing the narrow stairway that led downward. The air smelled of wood, metal, and something faintly electric. She stepped inside, her flashlight illuminating the worn steps, while the shadow hovered ahead, waiting patiently. At the bottom, the space opened into a hidden room Rena had never seen before. Unlike the dusty storage areas above, this room was alive with strange machinery. Tubes and wires snaked across the walls, connecting glowing panels and blinking lights. Small instruments hummed softly, filling the room with a faint vibration that seemed to echo in her chest. Rena's eyes widened. This was no ordinary storage room, it was a laboratory, carefully hidden from anyone who had visited the theater over the decades. The shadow moved closer to a central machine, floating beside it as though urging her to examine it. Rena approached and studied the intricate device. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, glass cylinders filled with faintly glowing energy, levers that seemed to control the flow of light, and small mirrors arranged in precise angles to direct beams across the room. She realized instantly that this was Malik's creation, the heart of his experiments. Rena carefully read through the notes scattered around the machine. They were written in neat, careful handwriting, detailing experiments to capture human movement as a form of energy. Malik had hoped to preserve performances, storing the essence of dance, acting, and music so that it could live on even after the performers were gone. Rena felt a shiver of awe. The shadows were the result of these experiments, living echoes of human motion, preserved in energy. As she studied, one shadow hovered near a console and pointed to a set of controls. Following its guidance, Rena pressed a small lever. A soft hum filled the room, and a panel slid open, revealing a series of tiny gears and wheels. The shadow twirled around the mechanism, almost as if showing her how it worked. She reached out carefully and adjusted a few pieces. Immediately, a beam of light shot across the room, touching other machines and making the shadows shimmer brighter. Rena watched in amazement as the shadows responded. They twisted and curved, forming patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like a conversation. Some formed shapes of people dancing, others resembling animals or abstract forms. Each movement felt purposeful, like the shadows were telling stories that had been trapped in the theater for decades. Rena felt a connection to them, a sense that she was not just observing history but becoming part of it. Hours passed as she explored the laboratory. She discovered panels that recorded patterns of movement, cylinders that stored energy, and mirrors that could direct the light to create precise effects. The shadows guided her to every corner, showing her what each machine had done and how Malik had intended them to work together. She realized that his experiments were not just about preserving motion, they were about creating a bridge between the past and present, allowing humans to interact with memory and creativity in a living form. At one point, a shadow floated to a small table, lifting a piece of paper with delicate sketches. It seemed to gesture toward her, indicating that she should examine it. Rena leaned closer and saw diagrams of gestures and movements, carefully recorded by Malik. Each sketch showed not only the motion itself but the intended emotion behind it. She smiled softly. Malik had not just been a scientist, he had been an artist, capturing the heart and soul of performance in a way no one else could. By late afternoon, Rena stepped back and looked around the room. The shadows moved gracefully, weaving through the light beams, performing an unseen choreography that filled the laboratory with energy. She realized she had uncovered the true heart of the theater, a place where creativity, science, and memory had merged to create something extraordinary. The shadows were not trapped, they were alive in their own way, and they had been waiting for someone like her to understand them. Rena took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of awe, excitement, and responsibility. The theater was more than a building, it was a living archive of human creativity. And she had been given the chance to awaken it, to help the shadows share their stories with the world. She smiled at the nearest shadow, which hovered near her shoulder as if sensing her determination. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. The shadows flickered brighter, almost in agreement. The theater had secrets, and Rena was ready to uncover them all. She knew that with patience, study, and care, she could bring the theater back to life. Not just as a building, but as a place where the past could speak, dance, and perform once again, guided by her and the shadows that had waited so long to be seen. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the town, but inside the hidden laboratory, light and energy danced together, a silent symphony of history, discovery, and hope. Rena stayed until the last glimmer of daylight faded, already planning her next steps. She had found Malik's heart in the shadows, and now it was hers to understand, protect, and awaken. The next morning, Rena returned to the theater with a determined step. The town was still quiet, with only the soft chirping of birds outside, but inside, the theater seemed alive with anticipation. Shadows flickered along the walls as if they had waited for this moment. Rena carried her toolkit, her notebook, and a small lamp. Today, she was ready to try something she had never dared before. She would bring the theater to life. She started with the main machine in the hidden laboratory, carefully inspecting each lever, gear, and glowing tube. Her fingers moved confidently as she connected wires and adjusted mirrors, following the patterns she had studied from Malik's notes. The shadows hovered nearby, twisting and stretching, guiding her with gestures and movements. It was clear they understood her purpose. Rena took a deep breath and activated the machine. A soft hum filled the room, vibrating through the wooden floors and walls. Light beams shot across the theater, touching every shadow, every corner, and every surface. For a moment, nothing happened, and Rena's heart beat fast with nervous excitement. Then, slowly, the shadows began to move differently. They danced. At first, the movements were small flickers of light tracing across walls and ceiling, but soon the shadows stretched into shapes of dancers, performers, and animals. They twirled, leaped, and bowed, performing sequences that seemed rehearsed yet alive. Rena gasped, realizing that Malik's invention had worked. The theater was no longer empty. History was performing again. She moved toward the stage, guiding the shadows with her gestures. They responded immediately, forming patterns that told stories of past performances. Some shadows formed entire casts of actors, frozen in mid-action, while others mimicked dances and music that had not been performed in decades. The theater seemed to pulse with life, as if it had remembered its glory and was eager to share it. Rena noticed the townspeople beginning to gather outside. Curious about the strange lights and sounds, they peeked through broken windows and creaking doors. Word of the theater's activity had spread quickly, and soon a small crowd had gathered in the street. They watched in awe as the shadows performed inside, the flickering light creating a magical display that seemed to come from another world. Encouraged, Rena adjusted the machine further, allowing the shadows to interact more with the space. They moved along the stage, weaving between seats, and forming shapes that could be seen from outside the windows. The townspeople gasped and whispered in amazement. Some recognized the movements they had seen the old performances long ago, and memories came rushing back. Others had never seen anything like it, and their eyes widened in wonder. The shadows responded to Rena's gestures, creating a complex choreography. They lifted imaginary curtains, performed scenes from plays, and even formed abstract shapes that seemed to tell stories of the past. Light bounced off mirrors and panels, filling the theater with patterns that shifted and shimmered like living paintings. Rena watched, smiling, as the machine and the shadows worked together to create a performance unlike any other. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. The theater glowed with energy, the shadows performing tirelessly. Rena noticed one shadow floating near the center of the stage, twisting into a shape that resembled Malik himself. It was a small, subtle tribute, almost as if the shadows were thanking her for awakening them. She felt a warmth in her chest, a deep connection to the people who had created this magic decades ago. By the time night fell, the town's streets were filled with people, all watching the shadows perform. Rena stepped back, letting the shadows take the lead. They responded beautifully, moving in harmony, dancing and acting with grace and intelligence. She realized that the theater had become a living memory, a place where the past could exist alongside the present. Finally, as the performance drew to a close, the shadows gathered on stage and froze in a final pose. The town erupted into applause, though there was no one on stage to receive it. Rena felt a smile spread across her face. She had done it. She had awakened the theater, and the shadows had shared their stories with the world. As the crowd began to disperse, Rena knelt on the stage, examining the machine one last time for the night. The shadows floated around her, flickering softly, almost like a gentle thank you. She realized that this was only the beginning. The theater was alive now, and she had the opportunity to continue learning from the shadows, exploring their stories, and bringing even more of the past to life. Outside, the night sky was clear, and the stars reflected the wonder that now filled the theater. Rena stood on the stage, looking at the shadows, and whispered softly, "This is only the beginning. We will create something extraordinary together." The shadows shimmered brightly, acknowledging her words. The theater had awakened, and a new chapter had begun, one where human curiosity, creativity, and the energy of the past danced together in harmony. The morning after the first full performance, Rena returned to the theater with a sense of purpose. The streets of Ardent were quiet, the town slowly waking, but inside the theater, shadows moved gently along the walls as if welcoming her. She carried her notebook, flashlight, and a small box of tools. Today, her goal was to create a lasting connection between the town and the shadows, allowing the theater to thrive once more. The shadows floated toward her immediately, swirling in excitement. Rena smiled and followed them to the machine in the hidden laboratory. She checked the levers, mirrors, and tubes, ensuring that everything was in proper working order. The shadows responded to her movements, twisting and flowing in patterns that mirrored her actions. It was clear they understood her intentions. Rena thought carefully about how to involve the townspeople. She wanted them to experience the theater's magic, not just as spectators, but as participants. She began by leaving notes at the town square, inviting people to come to the theater that evening. She described a special event without revealing the secrets, wanting their curiosity to guide them inside. As the afternoon passed, the theater filled with quiet anticipation. Shadows danced along the walls, practicing movements they would later perform for the crowd. Rena walked through the rows of seats, examining the patterns of light and shadow. She adjusted a few mirrors, allowing beams to flow more freely across the stage. The shadows responded instantly, forming shapes and gestures that seemed rehearsed yet alive. When evening arrived, the townspeople trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and awe. Rena guided them to the front row, explaining gently that what they were about to see was a performance unlike any other. She stayed mostly in the shadows herself, allowing the energy of the theater to flow naturally. Then, she activated the main machine. Soft lights glowed, and a hum filled the theater. The shadows began to move, twirling across the walls and stage. At first, the audience watched in silence, unsure of what they were seeing. But soon, their faces lit up with wonder as the shadows formed shapes of dancers, animals, and performers from long ago. Some shapes were familiar, scenes from plays and performances that the older townspeople remembered from their youth. Others were new, imaginative combinations of movement and energy that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. The audience gasped, laughed, and clapped. Children reached out, trying to follow the shadows' motions, and Rena guided them gently, showing how their movements could interact with the energy in the room. The shadows responded instantly, twisting, twirling, and copying their actions. The theater became a living, breathing space, a place where the past and present met in harmony. Rena watched the shadows, noticing a small cluster forming near the back of the stage. They shaped themselves into figures of Malik, the original inventor, and several performers. It was subtle but powerful, a tribute to the man who had created this magic. Rena felt a warmth in her chest, understanding that the shadows were grateful for her efforts. She had not only awakened them, but she had also honored their past. As the performance continued, Rena moved among the audience, helping people understand how to interact with the shadows. She demonstrated simple gestures, and the shadows responded beautifully, performing intricate movements and storytelling sequences that captivated everyone. Laughter, awe, and amazement filled the theater, and for the first time in decades, the theater truly felt alive. Hours passed quickly. When the final sequences ended, the shadows gathered at the center of the stage, forming a final tableau that told a story of memory, creativity, and hope. The audience erupted into applause, cheering and clapping for a performance they would never forget. Rena stepped forward, smiling, and the shadows twirled around her, acknowledging her presence. After the crowd had left, Rena sat on the edge of the stage, notebook in hand. The shadows flickered softly, moving around her in playful patterns. She realized that the theater had become more than just a building, it was a living space where creativity and memory could coexist. The shadows were no longer trapped, they were alive, intelligent, and ready to share their stories with anyone willing to listen. Rena made a decision. She would stay in Ardent for a while, teaching others how to interact with the shadows and helping the theater thrive. She envisioned workshops, performances, and storytelling sessions, all guided by the shadows and their unique energy. The theater would no longer be abandoned. It would become a hub of learning, creativity, and wonder for generations to come. As night fell, Rena looked around the empty theater. The shadows lingered, stretching and curling in gentle patterns, as if saying good night. She whispered softly, "Thank you. This is only the beginning." A small glow from the machine pulsed in response, and she smiled. The theater had been awakened, and a new chapter had begun, one filled with light, motion, and life. Outside, the town of Ardent was quiet once more, but inside the theater, the past and present danced together. And Rena knew that with patience, care, and imagination, the shadows would continue to perform, teach, and inspire for many years to come. The theater had a future now, one that belonged not only to the memories of the past but to the living energy that Rena had helped awaken. She stood, feeling the warmth of purpose in her chest, and whispered again to the shadows, "We will keep creating, together." The shadows twirled brightly, almost like a silent promise. The theater had found life again, and its story was far from over.